Hey guys, Barrett here. Welcome back to another video. Today we're talking about 7 tips or ideas for the advanced beginner in pickleball. Now keep in mind, the last one is a really big tip. It's quite advanced, but I think you're up to the challenge. Let's get started. Now I know I've done a lot of beginner content on this channel, but I decided that I want to start doing some content for that kind of advanced beginner stage right before like the intermediate stage, stuff like that. The interesting thing about this actually is that I don't come from a racket sport. I play golf, so I don't have any of that natural racket sport ability or any of that. So I was there. I was there in that beginner, advanced beginner kind of stage, so I thought I would give some tips on what you can look for in this area to sort of help you progress. Let's first start with pace. Pace is so important in pickleball. Pace is just how fast the ball is coming towards you or off your paddle. If you want to have better finesse in pickleball, you have to understand pace. Essentially how it works is when you go out there and you play, try this. Try to reduce the pace of your opponent's shots. Okay, so if you've got like a really hard shot coming in, okay, a lot of beginners will just try to smack it with their paddle and they'll see what happens, right? Typically this leads to a pop-up or it goes way out. Instead, let your paddle do some of the work for you. Try to absorb some of the force of that ball with your paddle and don't do anything. Don't swing, don't try to move your arm around or anything like that. Just stay frozen, let that ball impact the paddle, and a lot of really good things will happen with that. As someone who is just getting started with pickleball, what you'll notice is that all of a sudden you have more control over the ball than you think. And it's funny because you're not really doing much. And that's the weird part. To take pace off the ball, you don't really have to do anything. And that's the trick. So if you want to have better finesse, if you want to, get up to the kitchen line more and start to get into those dinking rallies, you have to learn how to slow down the pace of the game. And that block shot is how you do it. So try to reduce the shots of your opponents, and it will help a lot in the future. The second thing here is to start taking your shoes seriously. Footwork is a big deal in pickleball. You're going to be scooting all over the court, but the thing is that if you're not wearing the right type of shoe, or even if you have a shoe it's pretty much smoothed out on the bottom, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to have footwork. A tennis shoe works very well. A court shoe also works well, if like you're playing indoors on gymnasium flooring. But really the type of shoe that I use is the Tyrol pickleball shoe. That's my favorite shoe. I may have a review coming out on that shoe in a few months. We'll see what happens, but that's the shoe that I use. It's really important to make sure that you've got good traction on the court. It will really help with your footwork. And as we say in pickleball, feet first, swing later. Everything works from the feet up. Now you most likely have tried out quite a few paddles at this point in time. Perhaps you're trying out your friend's paddles, or maybe you ordered a few online. What I recommend in terms of paddle choice, I've got tons of paddle guides, but what I recommend is to try shapes and not brands. It's okay to try out different brands, nothing wrong with that, right? But I really encourage you to try out different shapes of paddles. Like for example, my Prince Response Pro has more of a rounded shape. You've got the Invicta, which is a little bit longer. You've got the Chrome NRG from ProLite, which is more of like a teardrop shape. You've got different types of shapes, and when you play with different types of paddles like that, it's a very different experience, and it can help you sort of narrow things down. The other thing I recommend with paddles is to try both lightweight and heavy paddles. Play with paddles that are way too heavy for you and paddles that are way too light for you. It will train you to understand what you like in terms of weight, so that one day you can be super confident in what your weight range is with paddles. Tip number 4, push your limits. Now, what I mean by this is to play against people who are significantly better than you. It can sometimes be quite difficult to play with people who are better than you, but if you have the chance, do it, because it's a very healthy thing to happen to you. Now, things that are healthy don't always taste good, and typically what happens is when you start to get better at pickleball and you start playing more often, you'll play with people who are better than you and you'll get crushed. And it hurts. It hurts a lot. But there is no better training tool. I mean, it's amazing what happens to you. It's very much so this up and down roller coaster kind of thing where you get crushed by people who are better than you, but then that's what motivates you. That's what makes you wake up the next morning and like sort of saying to yourself, okay, this is what I need to work on. This is the skill that I need. People who are better than you are very good at telling you what your weaknesses are because that's what they're doing to beat you. And that it's like this weird thing where it messes with your head, but man, I mean, they're telling you what you need to improve on essentially. So try to play with people who are much, much better than you. Allow yourself to get crushed. Don't take it personally, and then focus on what you can do to improve. Okay, the fifth point here. Private games are very different than open play. Now, since you're in sort of like this kind of beginner-ish area, you probably play a lot of open play, which is great. Open play is super fun. But when you start getting up there, private games and organized play becomes the norm. But it's very different. And the reason why it's different is because you can't sit out. And you can't say, no, go ahead. And so what that does is it kind of makes you have to bring your A game a little bit, because if you get invited to go out to a private game and it's just 4 of you there, you can't sit out. I mean, you've got to play decently well in order to give everyone else a good game. So keep that in mind as you get better. You're going to want to get in those private games because they're more organized, you can play back to back and so on, but it is very different. There are going to be some expectations on you to make sure that you're playing well. Now, we all have off days, of course. I've had my off days, but for the most part, it's going to be much different. But I definitely recommend that you try to get into private games. And hey, look, just organize them yourself. Just text a few people, say, hey, let's meet here. It's really good fun. And if you've been playing open play this whole time, it's going to be a very different experience. Okay, number 6, get to the net. Get to the net. Here's the thing about getting to the net. Sometimes we typically think of getting to the net as being you do a third shot and then you run all the way up and then that's it. But it very rarely works that way. Typically, getting to the net is a process. It's a multi-shot sort of thing that happens. Very rarely are you able to get to the net on one shot. So always keep that in mind that when it comes to getting to the net, yes, it's your goal because the vast majority of points are scored at the net. Don't think it's this one and done thing. In other words, don't put so much pressure on it. It's okay if you don't make the perfect third shot as long as it doesn't go into the net. If your third shot is a little bit high, you still have an opportunity on the 5th shot, and then the 7th, and then the 9th. So getting to the net is all about taking the pressure off the third shot, right? But also making sure that you're being confident in your shots and moving forward. One of the big goals that you can have early on with your pickleball journey is to make sure that you're transitioning successfully almost every single point. Not going to happen every single point, but it's a good goal to have. So get to that net. Okay, the final point here, number 7, and this is definitely more on the advanced side. Start developing topspin. Whenever I'm with like a student or something, or I get this question all the time about topspin, they say maybe like a 3-0 player asked me should I start messing with topspin? And typically in the past I would say, no, don't worry about topspin right now. It's very difficult to do, assuming they don't have a tennis background, of course. But these days, man, I'm encouraging people to start taking up the topspin. Topspin is a big part of high level play. And if you can start to get good at it, it will pay dividends. Because there's a couple things that topspin does. First of all, it keeps the ball low and unattackable because it dives down. That's what topspin does. It makes the ball dive. Also, when you hit a ball that has topspin on it, it'll bounce up further off the paddle. It'll bounce higher, which makes it even more attackable, right? So it's a nice 2-for-1 there. So if you can start to develop topspin, look at it as a brushing up kind of motion. I'll show a couple of clips here on what it looks like. But if you can kind of start to practice brushing up on the ball, if you go and drill or whatever, start to do that. Start to experiment with topspin because you're going to need it later on. That's for sure. All right, those are my 7 tips for the advanced beginner, guys. I hope that was helpful. Keep in mind, I am here for you. I am here to serve you in whatever way I can. I've got 114 free podcast episodes. I've got like 50 articles. I've got over 50 videos. I have tons of content that is all free and available to you. Dive deep, get in there and consume as much as you can. Feel free to subscribe as well. Leave me a like if you like the video. Thank you guys so much for joining me. And as usual, I'll see you next time.